do we invest all of those dollars? And you'll see as we talk more about the facilities task force recommendation, but do we invest all of those dollars into taking what we have and unbreaking it mostly? Or is that money better invested in a building that is going to be energy efficient? You know, I'm a sustainability person, so something that's going to be energy efficient, something that's going to flow better, something that's going to work better for those occupants. So that's something that's been on my mind with the facilities task force.
Probably my key takeaway.
I think it is.
I'll send him a note.
My key takeaway is cramped and outdated, and there's a little bit of toxicity. I had a headache after like 10 minutes of being in Fire Station 1 last Saturday. And yeah, I think that the concerns around the toxicity there as well as in the police station are a big concern of mine.
Let me see if I can project my voice. Oh, is that working? Oh, okay, great. Let me see. I think the one thing I was thinking about with the, thank you, with the fire station tour on Saturday was the difficulty for the fire engines to get out of every bay onto the street, and the challenges that they were having with that, and you know, that would be hugely challenging for anyone to do their work. That's what they do. They have to respond. So that's just something I was thinking about.
To kind of go off of all of you, I'm an environmental health and safety manager at my day job, and going through all these facilities, my eye just goes to every safety issue that I can see for all of our poor city workers who have to go there every day. The sustainability, the lack of sustainability, that spending all this money just to get to where we are and minimum requirements and things, why spend millions of dollars on things that aren't going to get us state-of-the-art anything, aren't going to get us city services, city employees to the point where they're working in a safe, you know, atmosphere, working in safe stairway conditions, you know, asbestos and tiles and drips and leaks and all of that. So the safety part of it, I think, has really stuck with me.
My one takeaway is the importance of what all of us are here doing, the importance of what the task force did to lay the future groundwork for what we have to do to keep our city up to date, keep our police, our firemen, our city personnel safe, and how important that is and what it is that we're doing. To me, that's the big takeaway.
For me, the cramped nature of everything is just amazing. I couldn't imagine, I mean, one shower, one bathroom, one facility for women officers. It's just pretty, I can't imagine 4 or 5 people in there changing, getting ready for their shift. I just can't imagine that. So for me, it's just how small everything is.
I wasn't sure what to expect from a city the size of Ferndale. I've luckily not spent a lot of time in the back of police stations, so I don't know this. But the first thing that came to my mind is safety and functionality. It doesn't appear to be even very safe for the officers or functional. And you're just, dollar-wise, you're always doing things where we're just going to be chasing our tail, and it's going to be more in the long run. So we can do better. So let's do better.
I think the big thing for me is like, what is the true age? If we do upgrade everything, what's the true like lifespan for all this stuff? Is it 80 years, 90 years? How fast things are changing. The other thing I was thinking of too is, there's male and like female facilities now, but what about non-binary people, for example? So that, and then just how fast technology changes too. I mean, I'm sure in the 1950s and 60s, like what they did do, these buildings were actually cutting edge back then, but not anymore. So this makes me wonder.
I think I was also just shocked how cramped everything was, and not only from a facilities functionality safety standpoint, but attracting employees, people that want to work in these facilities. I could see that as a major red flag for someone wanting to come here. And I know with all the big HR issues the city has, and employee retention and attraction, just from that standpoint alone, I think it just highlights the dire need. The facilities need upgrading.
I agree with everything you guys have said. And these facilities have changed and in some ways been upgraded since I was on council back in 2007, and we did these sort of inexpensive, if you will, but direly needed upgrades, mostly to the city hall and the police department. And I think with slightly new eyes walking through these public safety buildings, what I'm seeing is the power of patriarchy translated through physical space and design, right? It was never a consideration that women were at all in these jobs or in these spaces, and it's now impacting both our ability to recruit and retain staff, but like sort of the shock on all of our faces that, this has changed so much, and we're almost trapped in these spaces where we can't create anything sort of equitable or inclusive. That has been eye-opening for me, even having been in some of the back spaces before.
Thank you so much, Kate. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Donnie and Tom, or maybe Donnie and then Tom, or I'm not sure. Yeah. Yeah, please.
So when I say we as a construction industry, design industry, a lot of you guys know this, we'll build a building and expect it to maybe be used for 20 years, right? And then at that point, you don't really plan past that because you expect them to do a major renovation or reconfigure or move to a different space. City buildings like this, it doesn't really give you that opportunity, right? We can't just pack up and move to the next town over because they have better facilities, right? Like, it's what we have. So a normal building, 20 years, 30 years with superior maintenance. We're sitting in a 60-year-old building right now, right? All of our buildings are like that in the city, and it's our problem now, right, to try to fix this. And that was what my major takeaway was. And then the second point I wanted to make, and of course Kyle said it right at the end there, trying to keep the best people here, the best staff. That's how we're going to keep a really nice government working and a really nice city continuing on, right? Ferndale's made a great transition in the past 20 years, 30 years especially, and the only way to kind of keep that going is to keep the best people here. And I am not trying to, I just have to be negative at this point. I wouldn't prefer to work in this building, right? I work with Kyle actually, and we work in a really kind of small, tight, construction type office, and it's much, much nicer than this. And that's really all I have to say.
So I think you all probably know who I am, but I chaired the facilities task force last year. My name is Donnie Johnson. And I think your comments tonight, first and foremost, were incredibly validating to me and to the work of the task force. Since we produced the report and put it out into the community, we've had a lot of positive, but also a lot of negative feedback from that, and a lot of negative reactions toward a proposal to spend so much money on facilities. But getting another crop of folks to come through and say, okay, you all aren't off base, this really is a problem, is really validating, and it's really meaningful to what we did last year. And secondly, many of you probably know I work for the city of Detroit by day. I am the associate budget director for the city, and I oversee all of Detroit's funds related to infrastructure and capital investment, also housing, economic development, water, sewer, you name it. So sort of the big capital investment type stuff. And one thing I can tell you working for Detroit and coming into the city about a year and a half post-bankruptcy to join the team to fix everything that was broken is that a city is only as good as its services. And its services are only as good as the equipment and the physical plant resources to deliver those facilities. DPW can only do its job if it has a functional salt barn during the winter, if it has a place to park its equipment and its vehicles so that they're not rusting and decaying out in the rain every time it rains. You know, all of our police department, they need to have a certain number of people on shift. You got to have a certain amount of coverage for every shift. Not everybody's going to be out. Not every PO is going to be out on patrol. Some are going to be in offices. Some are doing paperwork. You need folks to be able to function in their jobs. And what we have right now is something that, can we get stuff done? Yeah. Joe and the team are getting stuff done. Ferndale's not falling into a pit, but it's not going to get better. It's not going to get better unless we do something about the core infrastructure. I said in my presentation to the City Council, your infrastructure, your facilities, that's your bread and butter. That is the one thing you need above all else to make things happen. Because government services do not happen in the cloud, they do not happen via email, they happen via men and women in vehicles, on the road, doing stuff, building stuff, picking stuff up, taking stuff other places, you name it. That has to be done with physical plant infrastructure. Without that, your city is not delivering anything to you that you need. And so while I understand that what we've presented is a large dollar value, and I'm going to be candid with you, and Tom would probably back me up on this, those dollars are going to be even higher when you get into the process of actually going out to bid, actually beginning construction, actually beginning renovation. But what's the alternative? The alternative is a degradation of city services. We're already struggling to retain residents. The last census dropped our population. Every ACS drops our American Community Survey, drops our population. We're now under 20,000 officially people. We can't retain people. You don't want to raise your family somewhere if your trash isn't being picked up regularly. If you can't rely on the police department to show up, which they do, and I never would think in Ferndale they wouldn't. But I work for a city that spent decades with that experience. I know what that experience is for a city, and I know it's not what we want. And so while I know that what we've asked is a lot, and what we've proposed is a lot, I think it's important, and I think you all taking it seriously is extremely meaningful. Sure, of course. So if we take a crash course through this presentation, which is going to be tough because I'm going to be holding this mic and doing this. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Where do you use that?
I'll scooch up. I'll just scooch up and I'll sit. There, it's a fireside chat. Hello, my dear friends. Yeah, yes, Mr. Rogers. I'm here to talk to you about facilities and infrastructure. Isn't that exciting? So as you can see from here, we met over the course of 6 months, 13 meetings with 8 hours of facility tours, an untold number of off the books hours spent, emailing and exchanging drafts of reports and reading through stuff and discussing what we had seen and learned. And what we came up with were these recommendations. So if you skip to this one that says Phase 1 recommendations, what we did was we phased the investments for the city. And so Phase 1, the order of operations in here is generally the order of operations we're recommending for the first phase. Fire Station 1 is a site expansion. Fire Station 2 is consolidation with the police department to create a larger public safety campus on the other side of the tracks. Now that's something that'll have to go through a lot of evaluation. Chief Emmy and his team and probably some other folks with expertise in the area will have to determine things about response rate, the train tracks. These are all considerations, but the best solution we came up with was that. Obviously, the Kulik Center is a high priority, so don't think that just because it's fourth on this list, it's not a high priority, but the Kulik can go it can go concurrently. Because the city's already fundraising for Kulik. We're already thinking through plans to do that. And so, Kulik doesn't have to wait in line behind police and fire. They can happen relatively close in time. Well, sure. So, meaning the replacement of the Kulik Center. Yeah, Kulik is not going to get in its current state. It is not going to go back into operation. The Martin Road Park Concessions Building, this would be something that would connect into our broader concept of a new recreation center sited at Martin Road Park. If the Martin Road Park site location doesn't work out, isn't something the community favors for whatever reason, we would still want to improve the concessions building so that we can improve the programming and the broader programming for Martin Road Park. Because one thing people want at big events and big, Little League games is you want a snack, you want some water, you want to use the bathroom. Those should be available and nice. And then finally, the Southwest Storage Yard. So I don't know that have you guys looked at this? Okay. Okay. So I don't know if any of you, I don't know where any of you live, sorry. Well, I know where some of you live. But most of you, I don't know where you live. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Southwest Storage Yard. So the Southwest Storage Yard is, like it says on the label, it's in the Southwest, the far Southwest. It's right on the border with the township, literally the border of the township. And it presents several issues. One, not a highest and best land use. And two, a pretty major environmental justice issue. The Southwest Storage Yard is a public works location. A lot of more heavy type activity happens there, but it's across the street from residentially zoned area in the township. And so there's a lot of issues with how it's being used in such close proximity to lower income residential areas across the street. So we really want to address that. We want to turn the storage yard into something a little bit more productive. We had several ideas about how to better use that. In this case, we were recommending the city pursue something like a private-public partnership in order to bring maybe housing and green space options to that space. Again, there are environmental concerns with the parcel that would have to be dealt with, but that's kind of our thinking for elevating that to a higher and better use. Gwen?
Donnie, why would that location need to be a public-private partnership? Is it related to the environmental remediation, or?
Yes. So, oftentimes when you have a parcel like the Southwest Storage Yard, where you have some environmental concerns, whether it's officially designated a brownfield. In the case of the storage yard, we have methane outgassing from stuff that's buried in there. The city going forward trying to completely develop that site on its own really is not going to be able to leverage the type of investment and capital resources that you would through like a public-private partnership. A developer is able to do a lot of the work. Environmental remediation is extraordinarily expensive. And I can, as someone who pays for building stuff in Detroit, you can imagine the condition of the soil in Detroit. So it costs a lot. Before you can even begin construction, you're doing remediation. And so a public-private partnership allows the city to enter into an agreement that would allow us to leverage more resources than we could just by going out. I mean, we could ask the voters to vote a bond that could pay for that, but that would be a lot, and that would be a lot to ask. And it would be a lot for the city staff itself to undertake, even with like a general contractor or consultants specializing in that area. So, the Southwest Storage Yard, it's not sexy. It's one of those things that a lot of residents don't think about, but it is really, really critically important because it does pose this really interesting issue of like land use, environmental justice, really economic and racial justice issues, considering the neighborhood and what's sited there vis-a-vis the neighbors around it. And so, we really wanted to put that in phase one, to really elevate that as something we should address. If you move to I guess you guys didn't put phase 2 in here, did you? Oh, is it a couple more pages? I missed it, I guess. Sorry. There it is. Oh, gosh, my bad. Okay, so phase 2, we made phase 2 because phase 2 is the stuff that we need to do it, but we could limp on a little longer in the condition that we have. Now, I know DPW's on here, and I was just using DPW as an example. The DPW service yard is rough. I mean, it's not in the best shape. But Could, Jim and the team continue to kind of spit and tape, hold it together? Yes, of course they can, for a little bit longer. I know he's mad. I can feel his eyes boring into me. But, but could it limp along a little bit longer? Yes, it could. Is that ideal? No, of course not. But we're not talking about finding an ideal versus an unideal. We're living in reality. So City Hall, this is the most controversial part. This is the thing that I think I have gotten the most blowback from is, this proposal to, oh, you just want to make a nice City Hall. Well, yes, in a sense. I want a City Hall that's functional. Like anybody would want a building that's functional. So yes, I want a building that's more functional, that doesn't flood in the basement and ruin your voting machines, that doesn't have a roof that's in unbelievably bad shape. I mean, there are issues with this building. We're not talking about, we weren't ever intending to propose some sort of really super fancy, like skyscraping tower. Yeah, we're not looking for that. We're looking for literally a workaday building where city staff have a place to sit. It's still gonna be cubes. It's still gonna be minimal offices. We're not talking about a luxury city hall. But the other question that came up with all of this was, and one of the folks we had on our group is a real estate person. She does a lot of development, a lot of buying and selling, and she was like, these are parcels that are worth a lot on 9 Mile, and we have to talk about, can we leverage that to get the resources we need to make other things better. And so City Hall, it could go last. It's fine. We can figure it out, but it's got to be done at some point. We can put it off, and we can say it's not palatable right now, it's not politically saleable right now. Fair point. It can wait, but it can't wait forever. There will come a time where this building becomes reasonably non-functional in enough areas that city staff cannot continue to operate here. And when that happens, you're just, okay, I guess we're just gonna knock it down. So we should get ahead of that, address the issue. The community center, this was sort of, as we talked through replacing the Kulik Center and building what would be kind of conceived of as more of a recreation center type facility, a slightly larger concept, we thought about the fact that we were recommending it be sited in Martin Road Park because they have the largest land space in which you could site a recreation center, but we thought maybe we wanted to build out more community space. Where could we create more community space than just the one community center or recreation center? And that's where we came up with the idea of the community center you see here. It's sort of consolidating the Parks and Rec office space and some more meeting space into sort of a broader community space that would be less programmed than a recreation center, a little bit more free-form, open for people to rent. The seniors could meet there, other community and neighborhood groups could meet there. It would be sort of an all-purpose type meeting space. Could be rented by businesses that want to have their staff meeting there along in local businesses, just those sorts of spaces. And it would also just get our Parks and Recreation into a space. Right now, Parks and Rec is, in a sort of a leased space situation, and that's not a long-term. That's just not a long-term solution. Obviously, like I said, DPW, could it wait a little longer? Yes, but, I really wish you guys could go see DPW. Drag them through DPW, Joe. It's in rough shape. The salt barn, I think if you've ever been around that area, if you all are familiar with where the DPW service yard is, off Paxton, if you're coming toward the yard, if you can see the salt barn, that big wooden building that's toward the back of the parcel, the back of the service yard, you can see that it's literally not plumb. It's literally leaning, like it's tilting. It's a wooden building. We have our salt stored in a wooden building that is not 100% weatherproof. So that can bring on some obvious issues. They gotta go salt roads. It's hard to salt a road when your salt has turned into a giant 3-ton block. So that's not great, that's not good. This is not ideal. Does it seem small? Yes, but it is affecting the efficiency of what the team needs to do. The DPW facilities themselves, if you went through it, you would see that there's an office in the DPW building where there is literally a manhole in the floor through which water and sewerage runs. The building was built over a main. Like, you can literally open a manhole and just climb down into the sewer. That's not ideal. Like, I don't think I need to tell you, or anybody who may be watching online, that's not your ideal office setup. So we really should do something about that. And then the Historical Society. So this is another thing that caused no end of grief, and rightfully so, that I feel like we, probably could have been a little bit more definitive, a little bit clearer about our recommendation here. But it's important to note the Historical Society is a private organization, not a city department. And so we had to juggle the fact that the city can't do a lot vis-a-vis them because they're not a city department, with a building that we know we can't keep in place if we're going to expand Fire 1, which we have to do. Fire 1 needs to become more functional. But that does mean that we have to find a home for the Historical Society. Is it the city's literal legal obligation to find a home for the Historical Society? No, it is not. It is a private organization that rented space in a building the city does technically own. Should we help? Yes, of course. It is the morally right thing to do. And that is what we have encouraged the city to do. You must partner with them. You have to be good neighbors and say, this is happening, so we're going to help you figure out a solution. And is it at the bottom of the list? Yes, it's because phase 2 could be 3, 4, 5 years from now. Phase 2 could be much further out. Phase 1 is what we want folks to focus on right now. Phase 1 is what we need to start sooner rather than later. Phase 2 can be a whole other conversation that we tackle again. Maybe another city administration will bring in a new task force to reevaluate, and God bless them. So, that's the plan that we have right now. So as we phased it. We think, and I still believe, we have brought a practical recommendation that can guide investment priorities for the city of Ferndale, and that I believe is clear and understandable to all residents of Ferndale about why we recommended what we recommended and the how. And Joe has, switched the screen to my favorite tab, which is the Don't Throw Good Money After Bad tab. So some of you are probably familiar with the sunk cost fallacy, which is like, well, I've already put several $1 million into this building in ad hoc repairs over the years. I should just stay in it. I've invested in it. I should keep it. No, it's still trash. I mean, it might be slightly nicer trash, but it's still trash. So you should probably stop putting a lot of your money into it. You can see on here, the square footage deficits, and that's really stark as well. I think that's important for the public to note. But you can also see the differences between new construction, expansion, rehabbing the existing building, or a rehab and expansion. So something like, looking at, let's say, Fire 1, new construction would be $10.4 million. Rehabbing and expanding in place would be 9.9. They're relatively the same. You could come up with a pretty reasonable solution for that parcel and not have to get too deep into the weeds on which one's the right one. But others, they're a little bit starker difference. You can see that in some cases, it makes more sense to build or rebuild or expand the existing facility in a more dramatic way than to just try to rehab the existing facility as it is, in terms of extending the useful life and that sort of thing. David? Yeah.
I read somewhere in here, is this on? I read somewhere in here about a public safety facility, police and fire station 2 being combined. Is that, they're separate here?
Yes. So
I was just confused by that, and I'm sorry.
No, that's a very fair point, and it's a very good point. And that is because we have no idea, we have no idea how much it would cost. We have no idea how much it would cost to do the joint facility at that space.
So then the new construction of a police facility is separate from fire station 2 as well?
Right. Okay. So I think a good thumbnail for this one, for easy, is to just look at Fire 2 and Police together. Put those numbers together.
Well, that's what I was doing in my head.
Yeah, keep doing that in your head.
Okay.
Basically, I think that's the safest thing to do. It's the closest we're going to get. Jim, do you have it?
Context I would add is it's like to add some context on the new construction numbers. I believe the way that we came up with this, I'm almost 100%, is that we took the needed space and we multiplied that by the industry standard construction number per square footage. So the fire station needs 26,531 square feet. We multiplied that by the industry standard cost per square foot for new construction on a fire station. So it would be accurate to take those two numbers to add them. Obviously, it's not going to capture it 100%, but these are industry standard estimates, so they are going to be still in the ballpark.
We have to factor purchasing the property by.
Yeah, so I'll repeat the question for the viewing audience. So the question they're talking about is the property surrounding Fire Station 2, and that is a vacant parking lot owned by Comerica Bank and the Comerica Bank parcel just to the west. So we have engaged Comerica and expressed our interest, and we continue to do so. We haven't had initial negotiations yet, though. But land acquisition will be tacked onto that.
Yeah, this number does not take into account the purchase of the land. Yeah, this is construction.
Start with questions. Good question. Didn't need to be good.
Earl talking stick.
Yes. Are there any estimates around maintenance after doing these things? Like maintenance for a new construction building would be different than something we have potentially?
Yeah, so the industry standard would be, pardon, 2 to 6% of the total cost of new construction. That's equalized over time. So if you expect a $100,000 boiler to last 30 years, 25 to 30 years, you should be expected, and it's the same with buildings as it is for equipment for the most part, to spend 2 to 6% of that total value per year to maintain that equipment or building. So I think, yeah, if you look at that, you can assume that for each building, 2 to 6% is roughly what we would spend on annual maintenance.
I want to make sure I understand the Martin Road Park recreation facility. Because I've certainly been in the facility at Villade Park that gets mentioned as a inspiration. I don't want to say comparable, but this isn't providing the same type of space. It's not providing a gym. It's not providing like the same type of space that we had at the Kulik Center, correct? It would be a new space or a new use of space in some ways, maybe less programmable space than was at the Kulik Center. I guess I want to make sure I understand what we would actually be thinking of. It's for the other spaces we said here's the cost to get us to functionality or to get us to the state we're in, right? Like we can't upgrade our air handler, it's 60 grand, just replace it type thing. When it comes to recreation, are we getting back to the standard of amenities that we had at the Kulik Center? Does it take both of these recreation facilities in order to do that? Or do we just put that out of our minds and we're not talking about similar any longer?
I can start with some context and then Donnie can build on it, I'm sure. So Martin Road is all of our parks, frankly, are complicated because we've accepted MDNR grants to fund projects. And when you accept MDNR grants, you accept a deed restriction that restricts your ability to use or to create and convert space into indoor uses. So there has to be, it has to promote outdoor recreation. It's deed restricted to do that now. So we were actually, what we learned from Donnie is Villade Park had a similar deed restriction because they'd accepted similar grants in the past. And the indoor-outdoor nature of the facility was acceptable for the DNR. And so a basketball court would be unacceptable. Office space is frowned upon. So we will have to explore our creativity to max out our opportunities for this facility within the boundaries of what's allowed by the MDNR.
And I think it's important, I think a really very important thing to note is that you know, Martin Road Park is our initial recommendation. It is not a decided thing. I mean, that'll be decided through community engagement, through feasibility studies. Like, I mean, we all know Martin Road Park is a wet park. The water table is very high in Martin Road Park. That poses an issue too. So deed restrictions, water issues, water table issues. I mean, there's no shortage of concerns about Martin Road Park. It doesn't mean that we can't figure out a solution to take back the parcel from the schools and rebuild on the existing site of the Kulik Center and repurpose the parcel. We may have some similar issues, but we don't know. The issue with this is that I can't say what we're going to decide to do because we're going to have to do a lot of intensive study to figure it out. As you all are aware, Ferndale does not have big, wide open swaths of land to build on. So we really have to make the best we can with what we know we have.
I can give a little bit of an update on it. At Monday's council meeting, we'll actually be presenting a progress update on Martin Road Recreation Facility. We received our third grant in the past, since this report was published, and we have now received $2.1 million in outside funding to help us build this project. So that's fantastic. We'll talk a little bit about that, how the money can be used and when we have to use it. There are terms on all grants. It's a contract, right? So we have some requirements that we'll have to deliver for it. But we are moving along. I think we estimated about $6 million for the cost of that facility. So it's about 33% funded currently from the work we've done since the report.
So I'm wondering if the police chief could talk a little bit for us about concerns about moving to a public safety facility potentially on the other side of train tracks that we know are very inconvenient. I mean, I presume your people are not the old-timey police officers eating donuts in their office waiting for a call to come in. So tell us a little bit about what the public might expect if this station were moved to the other side.
It's really no different than where we're operating right now. We have a large portion of the city that we serve is already east of the tracks, and the station is west of the tracks. So officers mostly are already deployed and radio dispatched. In the cases where they are in the station and have to be dispatched to the opposite side of the tracks, there's enough crossings right now for us to negotiate and get there still in a pretty timely manner. In a crazy scenario, there's always mutual aid. We work very closely with our partners in Hazel Park, Oak Park, Royal Oak, and Pleasant Ridge. So if we really needed it, help, and there were some assets on the wrong side of the tracks, we all work together very closely. But in 99.9% of the cases, we're able to negotiate the railroad crossing without any noticeable delay in service. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, yes. That sort of background is very helpful. Thank you.
Yes.
Any concerns with the movement around prisoner transfer to the court or anything about that? I know you talked a little bit about it on the tour, but just for anybody who might be watching on TV?
No, we would just go back to mobile transport or video arraignment or video court. Most of it is done by kiosk video arraignment from the lockup anyway. That is the preferred way to do it. It's the safest way to do it. It's now our industry standard to do video arraignment. Sometimes in very high profile or very capital offenses, they may require the suspect or the defendant to be brought before the judge in the courtroom. And in those cases, it's not an inconvenience to transport them in a vehicle to the courtroom.
Okay, so the train tracks and it really wouldn't present any sort of issue with having, if the station were to move?
No, I don't. I think I would welcome a partnership with the fire department. Chief Robinson and I have had discussions about it. We think our vision is aligned. I think that it doesn't make sense to duplicate a lot of the amenities that would be located in a police department and a fire department when you're talking about training rooms or a workout facility or a gym or a community room. Why make 2 or 3 of those when you can make one and share it? I think that I am very curious. I think there's a lot of very creative architects out there that love to get their hands on a challenge like this.
I just had a quick follow-up to exactly what you were just saying real quick. Is that common to, for, I know it like just makes sense, you know, have one facility versus having 2 or 3. Is that common for a city our size too? Like, is it just a common practice to have one sort of public safety facility?
Yes, and it's becoming more and more common because everybody has the same challenges that we do. Lack of real estate, lack of resources, and they find that it probably will enhance communication between PD personnel and FD personnel. And I think it just makes sense financially that we could go up a story or 2 on whatever given plot we have to work with. But I think the options are really limitless.
Back to the Martin Road Park thing, not being an expert with grants. The MDNR deed restrictions, are those permanent?
Yeah, so you can only get around them with a waiver, and it's not easy to get a waiver. The thing about the MDNR is actually what you would call a pass-through agency. This is federal dollars from the National Park Service, and their mission is to enrich the outdoor experience, right? So their goal is once you get the funding, you're going to agree to promote and in perpetuity keep this space for outdoor recreation. That is their mission.
Like Joe said, it's not impossible to get a waiver, but it's exceedingly rare. Exceedingly rare.
We can go back to the community center on the don't throw good money after bad. What is it? What is that? What does that line describe? Does that line of 25,000 square feet, because it is similar to the question about police and fire being on different lines. We're talking, Joe just said something about a $6 million pavilion in Martin Road Park, but this is 18. What is it?
This actually is just an example of the community center. We still had to value it, and we still had to provide an example of what a modern community center would look like should council not adopt the recommendation. So this was, we still had to do our due diligence.
Wanted to hear from you is what resonates with you about the recommendations that Donnie described. So what do you like? And what seems most important to consider as we think about our charge, which relates to whether we should recommend to City Council to put the Headley override on 2024 ballot. So we don't have to go around the table. We can go around the table if you're more comfortable, or we can just popcorn. What resonates and what seems most important to consider in lieu of our charge as a task force.
I'll break the ice for us. I said this before, I'll say it again. We need to spend money, right? We either spend the money on these very, very necessary repairs that you have now seen with your own eyes, or we spend the money on replacements in a lot of cases. Either way, the city needs to spend the money. So it's really a question of what do we spend the money on? The Facilities Task Force, we made a recommendation. Certainly that is open for continued discussion, right? But money is needed to repair these facilities. So that's really what has resonated with me.
I would agree with that. I think too, just the thoroughness and the thought put into these recommendations is really. I learned about this in Fern and Learn, and then hearing you talk more about it tonight, Donnie. It just like it's really incredible how much thought was not only put into like how do we rehab or update the facilities themselves, but how do we phase it in a way that we can get community buy-in, because that's such a huge component to this. You know, thinking about like how people are sensitive about, like, I completely agree, the city needs to spend the money. I think like we all see that here clearly, but getting folks to understand why that's so imperative, and in this order, I think makes a lot of sense too, in these recommendations, and you know, taking into consideration that there is like that political aspect to it. If we prioritize public safety over some of these other less urgent, still urgent, but you know, you had to prioritize somewhere. Yeah, I think that that's what's really sticking out to me, is just because that's one thing that's been in my mind, is like a challenge that we have to figure out, is how to approach this in a way where we can really get the community to understand that this is important and why it's so important. So.
Yeah, I really am always looking for a return on investment. And I think that the idea of combining police and fire is a really fantastic idea, because I could definitely see value in shared IT infrastructure and services, definitely address the gender inequality with accommodating, you know, female officers and firefighters. So I think that's really fantastic, and I am very much in agreement with, you know, the two of you as well, that the money needs to be spent. I don't like throwing good money after bad, like Donnie highlighted here in the report. So these are really critical things that need to be taken into account, and I think, you know, highlighting the return on investment to the public in general about what needs to be done is going to be important.
Yeah, all of that. You know, how you spend the money and what you spend the money on, and saying, yeah, we can get the new boiler, but it's still going to be a boiler, and why wouldn't we want to combine police and fire and pull all these resources into one space and have state-of-the-art and have good energy consumption and do good for the environment and all of these other safety issues and things, and they all come together. So that really resonates with me. Now, you getting community buy-in for that and passing, you know, having a recommendation of whether to you know, put the Headley back up for grabs and things like that, something that I think, you know, when we get into the nitty-gritty of the budget numbers and where would it come from? Like, if we wanted to go ahead with combining police and fire, where would that money have to come from? And, you know, just like we're all adults here and we have bills to pay and we have to make sacrifices for some things that we need versus what we want, I think that's the same thing that we're going to have to consider here. And hopefully, you know, with all of our different perspectives, we'll be able to come up with a way to encompass. And I know I've talked to, you know, my husband, my other community members about the things that we're learning here. I'm learning so much about the city, it's great, but I think getting feedback from our peers is also one of the great things that, you know, will help us to make those informed decisions of whether, you know, we get the community buy-in that we're going to need to be able to, you know, pass these phase 1 and phase 2 or other decisions that come about it.
Don't throw good money after bad. That's an important thing for everybody to remember with this. I think the Kulik Center is a good example. It still pains a lot of us that we lost that facility, gave it back to the schools. That's a really good example of throwing good money after bad. To me, that's important that people understand that. The monies that it would have cost to bring that building to where it needed to be didn't make sense when we could construct a new building, or when we will construct a new building eventually. That is a big important thing for me with all of this. Our building here, the fire departments, don't chase good money after bad or whatever it says. I think that's a very important part of this. I'm all about combining the police and fire. I've talked to the fire chief. It's a great idea. It's a great idea for morale to have these safety people all together, and I think that's the direction that it's going to go long term for us. We just have to make sure that our community understands the importance of what we're doing here.
I guess what resonates with me is I'm looking at the new construction costs and trying to think of it in the context of the Headley override. And I think, I think when we started, we said, oh, that's, what it was last year was $3.3 million or something. And it just doesn't seem like it's enough. And yeah, meaning the Headley override. And, or maybe it is finance over time, and prioritizing these. So for me, it's just a little bit, it just seems like we're talking about so small of an amount for what we really need. And that's what's resonating with me right
now. I think the first committee did a really thorough and excellent job. I think we could email that out to the citizens of Ferndale, and you can see right there in some of the just words and pictures. I guess one of my concerns, just as a citizen, is as we're making this decision, have we done everything we could do to get whatever money we could get? And I think we probably have with the grants, because I dug into your package, Joe. And I was thinking, well, is there a solar, company that could sponsor one of our buildings? And I don't even care if we have to name it, solar power, whatever, Acme Solar Power, fire and police, But I think a lot of citizens are going to want to know, have we done everything we could do to get all this money before we go raising taxes? Or Headley, or however it is going to be funded.
I think the recommendations here make a lot of sense to me. At least like the finance person in me, like at least 4 years ago when I did finance. I'm more so wondering, I guess, like what that second and third layer means behind all these estimates, like timing, like how long would it take to do new construction versus rehab and expand? What would temporary facilities look like? I guess that MPV is kind of what I'm looking for, the net present value. So taking all that timing and all the other factors into consideration, what does that look like in present value? And then also the variance here, like we've talked about, it's very likely that these numbers would be up. So like being able to see, okay, like this $18.3 million number that we have could have a variance of like plus or minus 10%, like that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of recommendations, it makes sense. But in terms of like new construction versus like rehab, it'd be good to see what those second and third layers look like.
I think going back to what resonates, it's just the dire need for upgrades is just kind of shocking, as a tall person walking through cramped council chambers, it just, how uncomfortable some of these things are. But I think beyond that, once we're going to Headley, and part of our task as this committee is, if this doesn't pass, what are our financial recommendations then too? So I think that's something else we need to consider. If we don't get this money, how is the city still going to function and still making some of those recommendations beyond what, like we have this great guideline set out, what we can do with the money if we are able to put it towards the task force recommendations, but still also being realistic, if this does not pass, how's the city going to allocate its even more strapped funds? So I think that's going to be another side of the coin we're really going to have to look at closely.
Yeah, why don't we finish now?
Kyle, I've never walked through a building as a tall person. That was a really good reminder. In a past job, I oversaw facilities and a number of other departments at the Detroit Historical Society, and managing in perpetuity buildings and collections is a terrifying thing. So fewer buildings, smarter buildings, combination of services and buildings in order to use them better have always appealed to me. We proposed some of these things back in 2010-ish, and the city was totally not ready. And I wonder if we're ready now. It seems like the smart thing to do. It seems that we would both be following perhaps a trend, as the chief said, but also, perhaps a leader among some of our inner ring suburbs. We know we like to be a leader on doing smart things. So, what's the political path, or the political question is just, to me, it's like, are we ready to do something really different, to perhaps combine spaces, if not combine departments, to perhaps even locate in or on someone else's facility. I mean, technically it's our parking structure. We talked about, leasing space from Credit Union 1 20 years ago, and people had a heart attack. So the idea of using our money smarter in order to upgrade our facilities and take some of the long-term perpetual maintenance off of the city is why fewer, smarter buildings and combining services resonates with me.
Any last words now that you all have had a chance to hear each other? Any other questions right now about the facilities recommendations? Good news is we have Quinn and we have Dale, who are part of the team, and I'm sure Donnie and Tom are just a call away. Good. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to let Joe preview the next meeting. It's going to be a finance-heavy meeting. Drink some caffeine before you come.
Yeah. So you might have read my email. The next meeting, we're really going to break into budget. I want to give you a similar presentation that council would have when we're looking at a 3-year forecast. That's what council adopts. So we're looking at fiscal 24, 25, and 26. We're actually in fiscal 24 right now, so you'll get caught up on where we're at today. You all asked really good questions about maintenance, and Jim had said 2 to 6%. Right now, our current budget with our Headley, Jim said we budget about 0.5%. So we should be between 2 and 6, 2 at the floor. We're at 0.5%. I can give you the same example because I know that a city manager knows the budget. They do it so much. And I still remember Jim asked me for $850,000 in minimum capital requests. Now that's the minimum. I funded $267,000. So that's the gap in today's dollars. And we'll walk you through that. We'll show you that. And then, looking at Martin Road, for some of the grant, we have to do some forecasting right now. So while the construction costs $6 million, once you construct it, you have to staff it and you have to maintain it. And that is approximately, at a high level, about $850,000 for a new facility if you're going to take care of it. And I think what I heard from the task force is let's do better moving forward than we did in the past, looking backwards. So we're going to take care of something if we invest in it. And that's where, if there's a facility millage or a Headley override millage, that's why they work in tandem. And oftentimes we think about just the construction project, but then there's the staffing and the support piece to it. So that's what we have to talk about. So we'll get into that next, and then after that, we're really getting into scenario planning. We're talking about what happens if things aren't passed. You can have various millage recommendations. So we'll get into that, and we'll look at scenario planning, and we'll work off of our knowledge base from what we've learned up till then. We're good? Need a motion? I think so, yeah. Yep.
All in favor? Motion carries.
Thanks, everyone. Dave, that's close to the election. Is this space going to be available? That's close to the election.